Imagine this. A billionaire walks into a high-end restaurant, known for his ruthless behavior. Every waiter avoids him. But then, a new waitress steps up, and she's about to do something no one else dares. She stands her ground. What happens next will shock you. Stick around to find out how one woman turned the tables on a billionaire. If you're part of the Black Visionaries family, hit that like button right now and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories like this one. It was just another day in one of New York City's most luxurious five-star restaurants. The kind of place that catered to the elite, where you could expect to see high-profile business people, celebrities, and politicians gathered under dim chandeliers, savoring the finest dishes and sipping expensive wines. The waiters moved with grace, gliding between tables in perfect sync, their polished black uniforms reflecting the soft glow of the overhead lights. Every detail was meticulously crafted to ensure an experience that exuded sophistication and exclusivity. But among all the glittering guests and impeccable service, one name had become notorious within the restaurant staff, a name whispered in hushed tones, accompanied by a mixture of fear and frustration. Victor Drake, a billionaire tech mogul whose wealth had made him an untouchable figure in the world of business, was known not just for his wealth but for his complete lack of basic human decency. He treated people like they were disposable, and his behavior towards the restaurant staff was legendary. No one dared to challenge him. Every waiter who had come into contact with him had learned to walk on eggshells, knowing that a single mistake could lead to a fury of insults and a scathing review that could ruin their reputations. Victor's visits to the restaurant were always an event. The moment he walked through the door, the air seemed to change. The staff went into immediate survival mode, avoiding eye contact and working with military precision, trying to get through his presence as smoothly as possible. They had learned to keep their heads down, doing their jobs with as little interaction as possible. No one ever spoke out when he treated them poorly, no one ever challenged him, and they all knew that to do so would mean facing his wrath. For months, the staff had accepted this treatment. It had become the norm. But today, something was different. Today, a new waitress was starting her shift. Her name was Julia Evans, a 23-year-old woman who had recently moved to New York City, brimming with hope, excitement, and ambition. She had no previous experience in fine dining, but was determined to make it. Julia was the type of person who didn't shy away from challenges, who stood up for herself and others, and who believed that every person deserved respect, no matter their position or wealth. She had heard the stories about Victor Drake before stepping into her new job, tales of his rude, entitled attitude and how he treated the waitstaff like dirt. Just stay out of his way, one of the senior waiters had told her during her training. Don't make eye contact and don't engage with him. He's a nightmare. But Julia wasn't the type to take advice like that passively. She didn't come to this city to shrink into the background or let anyone push her around. As she pulled on her apron and tied her hair back, she made a silent promise to herself. Today, she would be different. She wasn't about to let anyone walk over her, even if he was a billionaire. The first time she saw Victor was when he walked into the restaurant. He entered with the air of a man who was used to getting whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. His sharp suit and expensive watch announced his status before he even opened his mouth. His presence was imposing, and everyone around him seemed to move a little quicker, a little more cautiously. He scanned the room, barely acknowledging the hostess who greeted him, his eyes instead darting around as if searching for something or someone to criticize. Julia stood near the front, greeting customers and assisting where needed, and she couldn't help but notice the way the senior waiter stiffened as he passed. It was as if a silent alarm had gone off, signaling that they should avoid him at all costs. But Julia wasn't like the others, and she wasn't about to back down. She walked over to Victor's table, her heart pounding, but her face calm. "Good evening, Mr. Drake," she said with a bright smile, her voice steady. "My name is Julia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Victor didn't even look up. His eyes were focused on the menu, his posture exuding the kind of superiority that only someone with immense wealth and influence could possess. Without acknowledging her greeting, he waved her off, not even bothering to meet her gaze. "Just bring me the most expensive wine. And don't ask me any questions," he muttered dismissively, almost as if Julia wasn't even a person in his eyes. Julia took a deep breath, holding back the sting of his rudeness, but she didn't flinch. She knew this was the moment where many would have backed down, where they would have silently accepted his behavior and gone to fetch the wine. But not Julia. She wasn't here to be intimidated. "Of course, Mr. Drake," she said, her tone polite but firm. "I'll bring that right away." She turned and walked toward the wine cellar, keeping her composure despite the growing anger inside her. She couldn't believe how entitled he was, how casually he dismissed her. But she wasn't about to let him get away with it. She would do her job, yes, but she would also hold her ground. When she returned to his table with the wine, she was met with more of the same. He barely looked at her when she poured the wine into his glass, his eyes scanning his phone with a look of complete disinterest. When she finished, he let out a frustrated sigh, as though she had somehow inconvenienced him. "Too warm," he muttered, waving his hand as though her efforts were beneath him. "Get me a different bottle." Julia felt her stomach tighten, but she didn't let her frustration show. She smiled politely, even though her patience was beginning to wear thin. "I'll be happy to bring you a different bottle, Mr. Drake," she said, turning away. As she walked back to the wine cellar, she couldn't help but feel the eyes of the other staff members on her. They were all watching, silently willing her to avoid confrontation. They all knew that Victor Drake was a nightmare, and no one dared to challenge him. But Julia wasn't just any other waitress. She was new, yes, but she wasn't afraid of standing up for herself or anyone else who was being treated unfairly. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Why was it that people like Victor Drake felt they could get away with anything just because they had money? She returned with a new bottle of wine, uncorked it in front of him, and poured it into his glass without saying a word. As she finished, Victor looked up at her for the first time. He studied her, perhaps trying to see if she was the type of person who would back down like the others. "You're new, aren't you?" he said coldly. "I don't think I've seen you here before." "That's right," Julia replied, not missing a beat. "I'm new, and I'm here to make sure you have the best service possible." Victor's eyes narrowed, clearly irritated by her directness. He leaned back in his chair, sizing her up as if she were an insect under a magnifying glass. "You know, you're a bit too confident for someone in your position," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You should remember your place." Julia met his gaze without flinching. She had heard all the insults, all the criticisms people like him tossed around to keep people in their place, but she wasn't going to let him intimidate her. "You're right, Mr. Drake," she said, her voice calm yet unwavering. "I do have confidence, but that doesn't mean I'm any less worthy of respect, no matter who you are." For a moment, there was silence. The other staff members who had been watching the entire exchange couldn't believe what they were hearing. No one had ever dared to speak to Victor like that before. The room felt heavy with tension, and even the other customers seemed to notice the change in the atmosphere. Victor didn't know how to respond. He had expected Julia to back down, to apologize for whatever slight he thought he had perceived. But instead, she had called him out, gently but firmly. The moment hung in the air, and for the first time that evening, Victor didn't seem to have all the power. He leaned forward, his eyes still studying her. "You've got guts," he said, his tone changing ever so slightly. "But don't think you can pull that off again. You're lucky I don't make a scene." Julia stood her ground. "I'm not trying to make a scene, Mr. Drake. I'm just doing my job. But I won't tolerate disrespect." The rest of the evening passed with a strange sense of unease, but something had shifted. The other staff members who had witnessed the confrontation were in awe of Julia. They had never seen anyone stand up to Victor Drake like that before. In a way, she had not only stood up for herself, but for them as well. The atmosphere at the restaurant seemed to change, even if only for a moment. The staff, who had always avoided him, now looked at Victor differently. It wasn't about fear anymore, it was about respect. In the days that followed, the story of Julia's stand spread among the staff. They all admired her courage, and soon, even the senior waiters were starting to treat Victor with a little more distance, no longer walking on eggshells. Victor had become a bit of a pariah in his own right. His usual bullying had lost its power, and the respect he once demanded without question was no longer automatically given. As for Julia, she had earned the respect of her colleagues, and more importantly, she had proven to herself that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, should ever be allowed to treat others like they are beneath them. She had changed the dynamic in the restaurant in a way no one had thought possible, and in doing so, she had shown that sometimes standing your ground can change everything. Before you go, make sure you subscribe right now and join the Black Visionaries family, because we're building a movement of stories that open eyes, touch hearts, and change lives. Until next, Tim.